Hi guys, this is Mrs. Ullrey, and in this video I'm going to go over the answers to your Interpreting Chemical Formulas practice problems. So the first question on the sheet asked you how many elements are in the formula aluminum hydroxide. So here's aluminum hydroxide here, and remember when we're looking for elements we're looking for the capital letters. So I can see that I have 1, 2, 3 capital letters. And so I have 3 different elements in this formula. So Al stands for aluminum, O is oxygen, and H is hydrogen. So the next question asks you how many aluminum atoms are in this formula. So there is no subscript by the aluminum. So that's the same thing as having an imaginary 1, which means that we have just 1 aluminum in this formula. The reason we don't multiply it by this 3 is because aluminum is outside of the parentheses. It's not within this group. So the only thing that applies to the aluminum is the imaginary 1 that's right here, which is why we only have 1 aluminum. How many oxygen atoms are there? So oxygen is O. And we can see that there's no number next to the O, which means imaginary number 1, but then we also have to take that 1 and multiply it by the 3 on the outside, because the oxygen we can see is inside of the parentheses, which means the 3 multiplier applies to the O. So we're going to have 1 times 3, which is going to give us a total of 3 oxygen atoms. Hydrogen is going to be exactly the same way. So hydrogen, there's no subscript next to it, which means there's an imaginary 1. And then we're going to multiply it by the 3 on the outside, because everything inside of the parentheses gets multiplied by this number outside. So 1 times 3 gives us 3 hydrogens. And then finally it asks how many hydroxide ions there are. So hydroxide is made of the oxygen and the hydrogen. So this whole thing highlighted in blue is one big group. And then we see that we have a multiplier of 3 on the outside. So this means that we have 3 groups. So we have 3 hydroxide ions. The next part asks how many elements are in this new formula. So we have ammonium carbonate. And what we're going to do here is we're going to look again for the capital letters. So this time we have more capital letters. We have capital N, H, C, and O. So that means in this formula we actually have 4 different chemical elements. We have nitrogen, hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen. So 4 different elements because we have 4 different capital letters. And then it asks how many nitrogens we have. So nitrogen is inside this parentheses. There's an imaginary 1 next to it times the 2 on the outside. So 1 times 2 means we have 2 nitrogens. And then it asks how many hydrogen atoms there are. So here's our hydrogen right here, and we can see there's a subscript of 4 next to it. And then there's also the 2 on the outside. So we're going to do 4 times 2, which means there's 8 hydrogens. Then we're going to look at carbon. Carbon has no subscript next to it, so there's no multiplier inside of the parentheses. We come to the outside of the parentheses, there's no multiplier there, so it would be 1 times 1, which is 1, carbon. So there's only 1 carbon in this formula. And then for oxygen, so oxygen is here. We can see there's a multiplier of 3 directly connected to it, but there's no multiplier outside of the parentheses. So it's 3 times 1, which means there are 3 oxygens. And then the final question's asked about the polyatomic ions. So it says how many ammonium ions are there? So that N and the H and the 4, that's all one group, all that highlighted there in that teal blue. So that's one big group, and so all we're going to do is look at the multiplier outside. So that means there are 2 groups of NH4, so that means we have 2 ammonium ions. And then finally it asks about carbonate. Carbonate is CO3. So everything here in this like purpley pink color that's highlighted, that's one big group. And then we're going to look for a multiplier out here. And because there's no number there, that's the same thing as having an imaginary 1, which means we only have 1 group of carbonate.